Hi, today I want to set the record straight on some terminology, some nomenclature, and on the misconceptions about Middle English, Old English, and Shakespeare's English. So many a time I have students comment on Shakespeare's language as being Old English. They'll say something like, I just don't understand it. The Old English is really difficult for me to understand. So here's the problem. Shakespeare didn't write in Old English. Old English is actually another language. I'm going to talk about this. What Shakespeare wrote in was early modern English. Okay? Now, some people have said to me that their high school teachers made them read Beowulf in the original language, which is Old English. And I have to make clear to them that no, those teachers did not make them read it in Old English because they wouldn't understand it. What they made them read it in was some sort of archaic translation. So really what I want to talk about today is the difference between Old English, Middle English, which is what Chaucer wrote in, and early modern English, as well as the pronunciation of those things. So let's start with Shakespeare. Shakespeare was, because we're going to go backwards in time, Shakespeare was writing in the late 1500s, going into the early 1600s. He was writing at a time when language in England was definitely shifting. Pronunciation was a little different from what we would hear in England now, although unless you went out in the country, and then it would probably sound sort of similar. And but it's very accessible. There's really not a lot of difference between Shakespeare's English and our English. Chaucer was writing 200 years earlier than that, in the late 1300s. He was writing at a time when, here's my cat, he was writing at a time when the English language was just becoming really literary in a way that could be spread to lots of people. And then Old English, and for instance, today I'm going to talk about Beowulf, is from even several centuries before that, sort of before the year 1000. It's hard to date some of the Old English poems, but they're 1000, let's say, at the latest. Perhaps some of them are from earlier than that. And the reason that we know that is because in 1066, when William the Conqueror invaded England, well, he didn't really invade, he kind of invaded. Anyway, when William the Conqueror and his guys, the Normans, which are a version of French, took over England, they sort of succeeded in transplanting Norman culture, which would include language, and putting it into England. So the Anglo-Saxon culture, which was in England, was supplanted by the French Norman culture. Okay, so let's start this demonstration with Shakespeare. So one of the things that has to be discussed is over the course of, from sort of 1400, right around Chaucer's time, to about 1700, England, in the language of England, was undergoing what they call the Great Vowel Shift. That's a vowel with a V. So before 1400, the vowels of the English language sounded like the vowels of most of Europe. So we might say, when we say to our kids in kindergarten, what are the vowels? And they would say A, E, I, O, U. If you were to say to somebody who spoke French, I don't know if they do this in France, but if you were to say to somebody in France, a little kid, what are the vowels? They would say A, E, O, U. Guess what? O and U pretty much the same for the most part as long vowels. But A, the letter A, that sound, it doesn't make that sound in Romance languages. We are the weirdos in the English language who make the letter A, make the sound A. Everybody else would say it ah or ah. The same thing with E, would be A. Sorry, it's really confusing. Or eh. And the letter I would be E. Okay. So when we get to Shakespeare, most of the great vowel shift has happened. although it hasn't happened all the way. So you end up with these weird vowels that some kind of live somewhere in the middle. And you also end up with really clear diphthongs. So let's take the word bound. Back in Chaucer's time, the word bound would be bound. By Shakespeare's time, the word bound is bound, where you can hear both the U and the O. Bound. Now we say bound. The word has lost some of its oomph, I think. So that's really one of the big issues that you're dealing with when you start talking about original pronunciation is what time is this written in and where is the great vowel shift? Because it takes like 300 years for it to happen. So that's one of the big issues. So I want to give you a little bit of me doing Shakespeare pronunciation, but perhaps more importantly, a little bit of Ben Crystal doing it. David and Ben Crystal are father and son, not team exactly, but they do team up for a number of things, and they really are specialists in it. So here's my attempt at sonnet number 30, which is one of my favorites by Shakespeare in original pronunciation. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with all woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and wape afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances forgone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of forbemoaned moan, which I new pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. Here is a clip of Ben Crystal riffing on To Be or Not to Be. Literally, this video was taken at a reception where they were talking about original pronunciation and his projects, and they did 2 takes of him doing To Be or Not to Be.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against essay troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to slay, no more, and by a slave to say we end the heartache and 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is in.
So hopefully in both my video and in Ben Crystal's, you can hear the word I. Most of the time is more of like a oi. That's one of the big sounds. The vowel has, which was E, is moving towards I. So you've got somewhere some mutation between E and I, which comes up oi, oi. And that's what's happening a lot with Shakespeare. The R's are pronounced. We tend to think of English accents as being, you know, I'd rather, like fa. We don't pronounce the R. That would have been pronounced for Shakespeare, or would have had an R in it, not like pretty English. Whoa. So actually, original pronunciation Shakespeare sounded a lot more American than it did English. And in fact, they say that some of the people in Appalachia sound the most like the original pronunciation of Shakespeare. So American actors, don't be doing that fake British accent that people think you need to do for Shakespeare, because that's not what it sounded like. Okay, so Chaucer, writing at the end of the 1300s. Chaucer is in the Midlands, so he's sort of smack dab in the middle of the country, Londonish area. So actually what ended up happening in 1475 when the printing press revolution happened, generally speaking, it's Chaucer's spelling that kind of, and his compadres, gets used as standardized spelling. But until you get to the end of the 1400s with the printing press, spelling is completely not regular because people just spelled the way things sounded. And that's one of the reasons why we know how things sounded. So, because it's a natural thing to say, how do we know? Rhyme schemes. When poets are writing in a rhyme scheme, that tells you something. So we know that things used to rhyme that maybe don't rhyme anymore. Spelling. Spelling is huge. If you're writing phonetically, then everything that you put into a word must be sounded. So in the excerpt that I'm going to read for you from Chaucer's Nun's Priest Tale, which is the tale of Chanticleer the cock, and it's a fable. It's the cock and the chicken and the fox. The first line has the word daughters, and it is spelled Doghtres. Daughters. GH in the middle of all those words we have, night, fight, those GHs were pronounced. So fight, or ficht, actually. That fight is more like Shakespeare. Ficht is more like Chaucer. So in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when they have that whole thing about the silly English kniggets, that is actually pretty close to how the word night, Knight, would be pronounced, because KN, what the hell is up with the K being silent as we pronounce it now? It wasn't silent back then. Kniggets turns into kniggets for Monty Python. So everything gets pronounced. Final E's tend to be pronounced unless you're in a line of poetry and it might have lied. So the first line of the Canterbury Tales, Juan that April with a shora sota. That is that schwa at the end that the silent E gives us. It's become silent now, but it wasn't silent back then. That's a lot to handle. Sorry. So anyway, everything gets pronounced, and the vowels are the European vowels. Those are the two big things for Chaucer's time period. So think around 1400. And here's a clip of me reading a section that is particularly lively of the Nun's Priest Tale. And it's if you know the fable of the fox tricking the cock, and he gets the cock to look up and give him his neck, and he catches the cock and he starts to run away, and everybody in the barnyard goes crazy. So this little section is the description of everybody in the barnyard going crazy. This is the excerpt from the Nun's Priest Tale by Chaucer. This silly widow and eke her doctors twa hearden these hennes cry and mock and woe, and out at Dora starten they anon, and seeing the fox toward the grove gone, and bar upon his back the cock away, and cried out, hurrah, and wail away, ha ha, the fox, and after him they ran, and eke with staves many another man, ran Cole or dog, and Talbot and Gerland, and Malkin with a distaff in her hand, ran coo and calf, and eke the very hogges, for fared for the berking of the dogges, and shooting of the men and women eke, they run, so hem thochte her herte break. So one of the reasons why I picked that section was because some of the words are words we know. Cow, dog, hogs, calf, women, that kind of thing. So if you see, if you may have heard run coo and calf. Coo is C-O-W. It's the word cow. But you can see how that's part of that whole vowel shift. If O was never pronounced ow back then, but ooh, then coo. Same with the word now that we have, N-O-W. A lot of times in Chaucer, that's written N-U, new. So N-U and C-O-W practically rhyme. New, coo. Bingo. Okay, now the hard one. Old English, which used to be called Anglo-Saxon, which is more commonly referred to with capital letters as Old English now, because Anglo-Saxon has a little bit of it's a little too genetically, racially charged, I guess. So it is far closer to German or the languages of Scandinavia. It's Viking language, basically. So Old English, Old German, Old Norse, we're all cousins. Old Norse is the root and the beginnings of Swedish, Danish, Norwegian. So that's what you have to understand about Old English, is it's really a Germanic language. Again, everything is pronounced, and the vowels are the Romance language vowels. So here's a little excerpt of me reading the opening section of Beowulf, because that's one of the most, I don't know, it's the easiest way to say, hey, it's the beginning of Beowulf. So let me play that for you, and then I'll talk about it. Chwat, we jardena in jaar dagum, theod kuninge through jefunon, who the athelinges ellen fremadon. Oft sheld chefing, sheathena threatum, monoium meathum, meodo setla oftea, eggs hora earl, sith an eris werth fair chef defunden. Hey, das frofra je bad, werks onder welknum, weert mundum tha, of that him alwich thara sintendra, of er rade hieren schulde, gomben gebilden. That was God Kinning. So the first word, chwat, which is sometimes spelled the way it is on this text, and sometimes it's H-W-A-E-T. A-E, which is an ash. It's a specific letter of the two put together, and it makes the sound ah, as opposed to ah. Chwat is kind of like yo. It's our word what, but really it's being used more like hey, listen up. So yo is kind of a cool thing. The last line that I read, that was God Kuning, means that was a good king. And it's like one of the places in that passage where you can recognize the cognates of the words that become our modern words. So one of the big things with Old English is the use of the eth and the thorn. And they both essentially are making th sounds. You can see the one that looks like a P kind of in the spelling is usually at the beginnings of words, and the one that looks like a D with a little line through it is usually in the end, in the middle. And there's some difference between what's versus but essentially it's making that sound. So here's a fun fact, and I'm going to leave you with this. Ye old shoppy, right? We are all familiar with that. I will give you a graphic. Is not ye. It's actually the, because it's a handwriting version of the thorn, which looks like P. So I will give you a little graphic on that one. There's your mind-blowing thing. It's not ye old shoppy, it's the old shoppy. And please just don't say that Old English is a language that any high school could give to somebody to try to read, because it's a totally different language. And I took like 4 years of it in grad school to try to understand it. That's how hard it is. All right. Thanks for joining me.